The World Health Organization of WHO has been alerted by the increasing cases of pneumonia in Wuhan City, Hubei.
I'm declaring a public health emergency of international concern over the global outbreak of novel coronavirus.
Wuhan City is one of the centers of commercialism in the province of Hubei, and in that city, there is a wet market that sells exotic animals for food here. It is suspected that the COVID-19 started. Chinese authorities have confirmed that they have discovered another coronavirus. Coronavirus is a large family of viruses that causes fever and sometimes even worse diseases. Its name was taken from its shape that resembles a corona. One of example of coronavirus disease is the severe acute respiratory syndrome or SARS. SARS caused the death of 1,500 people in 2002. Some of the symptoms of this coronavirus were fever, cough and cold, shortness of breath, which can lead to pneumonia. According to medical experts, the new virus is similar to the virus that previously caused SARS, and that left untreated a vacant cause of death. This virus is zoonotic, which means that the virus can be transmitted from animal to human. Experts also learned that a person's virus can be transmitted into human through respiratory droplets such as coughing, sneezing, and their saliva. However, some of the confirmed cases of coronavirus are asymptomatic, which means they do not show the aforementioned symptoms. That is why the sudden increase of the number of sick people by the virus in China is not surprising. This virus is named Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2 or SARS-CoV-2 and causes a disease called COVID-19, which is abbreviation for Coronavirus Disease 2019. In the year of 2020, on January 30, a 38-years-old Chinese national woman from Wuhan City of China was reported to have traveled in Hong Kong in the Philippines, and she visited Cebu and Dumaguete and returned in Manila, and she consulted for her mild cough and turned out being positive in COVID-19 and has been confined at San Lazaro Hospital in Metro Manila. Was confirmed to be the first case of COVID-19 in the Philippines. But on February 1, the 44-years-old Chinese man turned out to be positive for COVID-19. The result was published after the death of the man. It makes the Philippines to be the first country outside of the China to record the confirmed death from the disease. On the Philippine scale of COVID-19, the fastest growing number of coronavirus cases is on the NCR, followed by the Calabarzon, and on March 7, 2020, it is preceded by the Central Visayas in being the top two. This scale was for January 30, 2020 until July 20, 2020. Due to the keep spreading of coronavirus, on March 16, 2020, the Philippine government under the President Rodrigo Duterte signed Proclamation number 929 declaring the state of calamity and announced the Enhanced Community Quarantine or ECQ in Luzon, and it is also includes the associated islands of it, which is effectively in total lockdown, which is the movement of the populations are restricted except for necessity, work, and health circumstances. And after 2 days of announcing and implementing of the community quarantine in Manila, added the restrictions that mandated the temporary closure of non-essential shops and businesses, and follows the confirmation of the first localized transmission on March 7, the Department of Health DOH raised its alert level to Code Red Sub-Level 1. President Rodrigo Duterte later issued Proclamation 922 on March 9, formally declaring a public health emergency. authorizing local governments units to employ their local disaster risk reduction management funds.
Land, domestic air, and domestic sea travel to and from Metro Manila shall be suspended beginning March 15, 2020 and to end on April 14, 2020.
The president's sweeping lockdown applies to 12.8 million people in the Philippine capital. COVID-19 infections in the country have more than doubled in 1 week to at least 52 cases. Only people that can prove that they have a transactional job within Manila will be allowed to enter the city, and they will need to present an ID or any document stating the fact. The trade and businesses stop in Manila, and other people are temporarily stopped working.
I am placing the entire mainland of Luzon under quarantine until April 12.
President Duterte said Chinese President Xi Jinping has offered support. He said Manila may take up Beijing's offer if the situation develops. President Duterte is being tested for the coronavirus as 2 of his officials go into self-quarantine. They have been in contact with an infected person. On March 13, a Filipino diplomat who works at the UN tested positive for the COVID-19. The woman is the first known case at the World Body's New York headquarters. The Philippines will also ban large gatherings and extend school closures for another month. Travelers from areas reporting local transmission of COVID-19 are now banned, and Filipinos also can travel to countries and regions with such cases. President Duterte warned those who's violating the rules could face imprisonment.
Ayaw namin gamitin yan, pero kasi takot kasi sabihin lockdown. But it's a lockdown. There is no struggle of power here. Walang away dito, walang gera. It's just a matter of protecting and defending you from COVID-19.
The Department of Trade and Industry, or DTI, on March 9 issued a directive ordering retailers should only allow the sale of 2 bottles of each type of disinfectant per person, as a measure against hoarding due to many people run on panic buying. In the line with the Public Health Emergency Declaration, the department imposed a 60-day price freeze on basic commodities on all country. President Rodrigo Duterte also signed the administrative orders providing the daily hazard pay and additional special risk allowance to the frontliner government officials and employees, especially including the health workers. The Philippine Government Office of the Vice President Leni Robredo has raised the funding for personal protective equipment. The Department of Labor and Employment, or DOLE, and the Department of Social Welfare and Development, or DSWD, has started their own emergency cash subsidy programs.
The Philippine government admits it is forced to open the economy despite the growing number of coronavirus infections. That is because the country is now in one of its worst periods of recession in recent decades. Millions of Filipinos have lost their jobs, and more communities are expected to sink deeper in poverty in the coming months.
But there's evidence the impact may be worse than the government says. Pollster's Social Weather Station reports close to half of the 27.3 workforce have lost their jobs, largely because of economic ripple effects and the closure of businesses. The government says it sees the economy rebounding in 2021 and 2022.
Many of the Filipinos, especially the people living in the squatter area, had sunk into more poverty because of COVID-19. and many of them didn't even get any cash aid or the SAP by the government decent this time. On April 1, 2020, more than 100 people from city slums of Sitio San Roque gathered on a nearby highway to voice their discontent and demand of food and aid. Their already poverty-stricken community, like many others, had found it near impossible to deal with having no livelihood or even space to stock up of food in such tight quarters of the police. 21 of the hunger protesters were beaten and arrested by the police. The arrest occurred just over a week after President Duterte granted himself emergency powers to deal with the pandemic. With newly acquired powers, he called for an even stricter implementation of the ECQ. He had message for anyone who intended to recreate the behavior of the San Roque residents.
I will not hesitate. My orders are sa pulis pati military, pati mga barangay, na pagka ginulo at nagkaroon ng okasyon na lumaban at ang buhay ninyo ay nalagay sa alanganin, shoot them dead. Alam mo, we are ready for you. Gulo o barilan o patayan, I will not hesitate. My soldiers to shoot you, I will not hesitate to order the police to arrest and detain you. Ngayon, pag kayo ang na-detain, bahala kayo sa pagkain.
The incident summarily reflected the handling of injustice by the authorities during the lockdown. Taking his cue, the police declared they will stop issuing warnings and will simply arrest even low-level violators of the quarantine rules. At a police press briefing in early April, arrests were shown to have spiked during the quarantine, with the cap snubbing an average of more than 1,000 people per day nationwide. On May 11, 2020, photo provided by the Malacanang Palace Presidential Photographers Division. President Rodrigo Duterte was wearing a mask and talks to the cabinet officials during the Malacanang presidential meeting in Manila. As the pandemic was set to affect many Filipinos, a large share of populations headed the government suggested a precautionary measures. In a recent survey, most people in the Philippines frequently wore a face mask when going out of the house and washed their hands frequently and kept physical distancing at 1 meter away per person, as the government and DOH says. In addition to those mandatory measures, a majority of Filipinos use face shields when using public transportation and going to public establishments, because some of the public establishments posted a no face mask and no face shields, no entry. Some of the most important and recent initiatives and activities by the Philippine government is the establishment of the One Command Hospital Center or OCHC that launched on August 20, 2020 as a referral between private and public hospital for COVID-19 patients. The increasing level of the country's testing capacity, the improvement in the numbers of contact tracers, and intensified the contact tracing efforts, the scaling up of the local healthcare system capacity and infrastructure. The recent passage into law of the Bayanihan Act 2 and the latest directive of the President Rodrigo Duterte to extend the state of calamity in the Philippines until September 12, 2021, to give the national and local governments time to marshal their resources to the better address and to help to defeat the pandemic. The enactment into law of the Republic Act No. 11494 or the Bayanihan to Recover as One Act or Bayanihan Act 2 on September 11, 2020, it is not only a huge boost to response on COVID-19 on the Philippines, but more than anything, it is a piece of law that provides a large funding to fortify the economic recovery efforts of the Philippines from the devastation that caused by the pandemic. Bayanihan Act 2 is worth of 165.5 billion pesos and it will be affected until December 19, 2020.
Such emergency stretch government resources to its limit. In response to the Office of the President, work closely with Congress for the quick passage of the Bayanihan to Heal as One Act. May I again reiterate my thanks to you, the men and women of Congress, for the effort you invested in passing that law. I hope that we can get some or the same treatment of clarity, purpose, and the fastness to support the passage of the Bayanihan Recover to Act as One, which is supplement funds for recovery and response against the impact of COVID-19 pandemic.
The new law prioritizes the financing of some of the most government important programs amid to the pandemic, and that includes the further improvement of the healthcare system and infrastructure of the country to better respond on COVID-19 crisis. Extension of benefits to the healthcare workers and frontliners, funding cash work programs to address the surge of unemployment in the country due to pandemic, financing support and assistance to the agricultural sector and industries that were much affected by the pandemic, and the procurement of coronavirus vaccines once it's readily available to everyone. On December 14, 2020, 5 days before the end of the Bayanihan Heal as One Act by President Rodrigo Duterte, has certified as urgent bills extending the validity of the Bayanihan to Recover as One Act, or the Bayanihan Act 2. In the 2020 national budget, Senate President Vicente Soto II confirmed that the upper chamber received the certification documents from the Malacanang Palace. Bayanihan 2 gives the President Duterte government a 165.5 billion pesos for programs to help the country's economic recovery, pay for the more coronavirus testing and contact tracing, and provide assistance to healthcare frontliners. The House of Representatives acted fast on the President's directive. The Committee on Appropriations hastily called a virtual meeting among its members at 7 p.m. on Monday to pass House Bill number 8063, which would extend the validity of funds under Bayanihan 2 until June 30, 2020. The measure, however, does not have any specific provisions that would allow Duterte to continue exercising his special powers beyond December 19, 2020. Despite of this pandemic, Filipino people are still finding ways to support and provide their families. And while the government is working and responding to the COVID-19, Filipinos are practicing the new normal. And many of them tried and start a new businesses like online marketing to have an income for their families. The students of this generation did not do the traditional face-to-face class instead of the modular and online classes. And for the graduating and moving up students also did not have a proper ceremony, but they had a virtual graduation and moving up through social media. But at first, on May 26, 2020, President Rodrigo Duterte said he is not favor on the opening of school classes until there is a available vaccine against the COVID-19.
Mga bata, wag muna. Yung opening ng classes, that's a very... I will not allow the opening of classes na magdikit-dikit yung mga bata. No? Bahala na hindi na makatapos. For this generation, wala na matapos na doktor pati engineer. Wala. Kasi hindi na wala ng aral. Laro na lang. Unless I am sure that they are really safe. it's useless to be talking about opening of classes. That's for my man. Para sa akin, bakuna muna. Pag nandyan ang bakuna, okay na.
But the economy of the Philippines were really going to sink down if the education system will stop. So on July 2020 and August 2020, some of the schools in the Philippines started their classes through online class and modular class. But more than 6 million elementary and high school students are failed to enroll during pandemic for the school year 2020 to 2021. Many of them said that the online and modular class are difficult and they will not going to learn from it, unlike the face-to-face class. And the students are kept on putting the hashtag academic freeze on social media, but the DepEd responds that they cannot stop the learning of the students.
Until the COVID-19 vaccine is available, I will not allow the traditional face-to-face teaching or learning unless the risk of exposure to the sickness are eliminated. I cannot and will not put to rest the health and lives of our students and teachers. About 2 weeks ago, I seem to have said that I would allow the face-to-face classes to resume. But we were talking actually of January, because my thinking is that by September we would have the vaccine. How to get it from the producers or from other governments is really something which we have to deal with, because everyone, it's a global need, and everyone will go for it.
On July 28, 2020, the President said that they are preparing for the face-to-face classes in January, but due to the new variant of the COVID-19, it is not continued.
I have allowed kasi the face-to-face classes as pilot projects all over the country. With the new strain, true or not, maybe it's true because it's being validated in Germany and South Africa, UK. Yung order ko noon kay Briones, the chief secretary ko, she's here. I'm calling up the order. I will not allow face-to-face classes of children until we are through with this. We have to present, we have to know the nature of the germ that we are confronting. Wala pa tayong alam, and I cannot take the risk of allowing the children. That would be a disaster actually. So, mindful of that, I am canceling the order I gave a few weeks ago, to Secretary Briones of the Education Department to suspend everything, all activities of children, especially yung face-to-face class.
Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte said that the Philippines expects to receive 30 million doses of the Vavax INC's COVID-19 vaccine by July 2021, boosting the country's effort to secure supplies to the vaccine to more than 100 million people. Despite the consultations with the numerous vaccine makers, the Philippines has so far signed only one supply deal with the help of its private sector to acquire 2.6 million shots of vaccine developed by the AstraZeneca. It plans to buy 25 million doses of vaccine from China's Sinovac Biotic vaccine for the delivery by March and aims to secure between 4 and 25 million doses of vaccines from Moderna and Arcturus Therapeutics Holding INC. 30 million dosage of an Indian-made Novavax vaccine are assured possibly with no cash advance. It will be available by July 2021, said by the Foreign Affairs Secretary Teodoro Locsin. It is said in the interview with the CNN Philippines. He said the information came from Serum Institute of India, the world's largest vaccine producer, and that the terms of supply deal may be signed before the end of the year 2020. There was no immediate comment from the institute, which in August entered a supply and license government agreement with the Novavax INC for the development of the commercialization of its COVID-19 vaccine candidate. Talks with the Moderna, which has been granted emergency use authorizations by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, will be begin next week. Locsin said, with 459,789 infections and 8,947 deaths, the Philippines has recorded the second highest number of COVID-19 infections and casualties in Southeast Asia after Indonesia. Vaccines are now becoming available worldwide, and while some of the developed countries like the UK and US have already begun their first rollout of vaccination, the Philippines is now on the third of four stage of its COVID-19 national vaccine roadmap. In his presentation, Vaccine Caesar Secretary Carlito Galvez stated that the country is nearing completion of its procurement process and financing, and it now preparing the supply chain and distribution and deployment plan. Priority groups for the initial rollout include the healthcare workers, vulnerable persons, senior citizens, indigents, and poor communities. Many of the Filipino patients are still praying and hoping to get the vaccine, and some of the scientists here in our country was still trying to get the vaccine. But many of the Filipinos were shocked when President Duterte said that many in the Philippines, especially some of the cabinet officials and soldiers, were vaccinated with Sinopharm vaccine. President Duterte said this on December 26, 2020.
Yun nga, sabi ko, it has passed the test sa kanila. Hindi naman yan sila mag-ano kung if it is deleterious to their citizens, they would not even attempt to inject one person. Pero marami na, at sabihin ko sa iyo, marami na ang nagpa-injection dito sa Sinopharm. Yun ang masakit yung ulo ng iba, hindi ako. Halos lahat ng sundalo na tusukan. I have to be frank and to tell the truth. I will not voice a lie. Marami na nagpatusok. Lahat. Up to now, wala akong narinig for the select few. Not all soldiers. Not all soldiers. Hindi pa kasi policy. If it is policy now to have them injected with it. Pero gusto ko mauna sila because I do not want a sickly armed forces and a sickly police. The reason why is that they have to be in good health all the time because they are responsible for the law and order.
Some of the Filipinos are afraid to not having a vaccine, especially in the people with no houses, people living in poverty, and some unemployed citizens. And some are afraid to be injected with the new COVID-19 vaccine, because maybe it was like the Dingvaxia that can be cause of their death. In God's will, we all need to trust and have faith, and always be thankful because we are still alive, and should always pray for the best for all of us. While the government is working with the COVID-19, we should be more careful and follow the rules that mandated to us and practice the new normal situation.